All right, here we go. This is Unpacking Unity, and I am Mel Bidggood. Welcome back to the Unpacking Unity podcast, Series 2, Episode 2. Very excited to delve into another one of the Unity conditions today. Last week we spoke about the transformational change space and the unity condition of united meaning. So we really introduced why transformational change or any change endeavours tend to fail more often than not. The global statistic is 70%. And essentially the reason that is because people just aren't on board with the change. So we tend to look at change from a change management perspective of what are the key functions that we need to do to roll out our change. And yes, we're aware that we need to convince our people in terms of bringing them on board and making sure they come along. But it's the cause and effect relationship that we're really needing to relook in that space. So rather than seeing our people being on board with the change as a factor, we need to understand that it's the factor. If we don't have that factor in place, then the change will fail. Your change will be part of the 70% failure rate. And so that locates for us that the people piece has to be the foundational piece, not a consideration. So it comes first. We need to look at it from a foundational lens. It comes first. And what does that need to look like? And that's where the unity conditions come in. If you joined me last time, you will recall that we started discussing the unity condition of united meaning. And I was also framing why unity is so important and the buy-in issue with people not buying into the change. So through our research and development, and that was a 5-year research and development period, we've discovered that it's not buy-in, it's ownership. Your people need to own the change alongside you. And so in today's discussion, I want to unpack the next unity condition. Last time, we also talked about the important role that beliefs play in relation to the unity condition of united meaning. If you didn't watch or listen to that first episode, I encourage you to do that because we're not going to rehash that today. But I do want to bring across that focus on your people's beliefs. Essentially, what your people believe is probably the most important component when it comes to managing the human part of change. The second unity condition is super basic. No one would argue with the importance of this in terms of having a good, well-functioning, high-performing organizational team, and that is the condition of trust. And so if you're able to have that unity condition of trust in place as an environmental condition for your people, and you can also ensure that is maintained throughout your change, then that is going to be one of the 3 key components in terms of the environment your people need to bring your change priorities through to a successful outcome. And so trust is the psychological safety component of your people, which is part of the simple transformation method, which this podcast doesn't go into so deeply, but the first simple law of transformation is safety. Your people need to feel safe and secure in order for them to perform well and to also understand and perceive the change in the way that it needs to be perceived for it to land successfully. So what I mean by that is that if your people have low trust in you, their leadership in the organization, everything gets filtered through a lens of what the threat might be, through a lens of is there a threat and what that threat might be. And so essentially that's the filtering system when we have a low trust environment. So essentially a low trust environment equals threat, a sense of danger, and our fight-flight system is more aroused and looking for the danger in situations. So coming back to that core concept of beliefs, which I always say this in the training rooms, other than the unity conditions and the simple laws and these frameworks that we've been developing, if there's one thing that you can hold on to when it comes to leading your people through change or implementing change or seeking to build unity, it's that understanding what the beliefs of your people are and the commitment to influence and support change of those beliefs, because that's really going to ground you in terms of putting your energy into what matters and building infrastructure in your capability space, in your people space, that is actually creating that change in the human space. For example, if we know that there's a low trust situation that we're needing to deal with. So one would be actually, how do we find out what the trust levels are of our people? So when it comes to things like employee engagement, employee surveying, roadshows, spending time with your people, that actually becomes an outcome priority. It's how do we know our people trust us and we've got that condition of trust in place? How do we measure that? And then essentially, how do we measure progress as well? So obviously the other how is how do we build trust, but actually looking at it from a space of measurement as opposed to, oh yeah, of course trust is important, because I hear that a lot. Even with organizations that I work with, there's always a keenness to get to the change management side of our curriculum offerings, which I rate highly, having spent over 5 years developing that and seeing its effectiveness in the change management space. But essentially, the building of the conditions, even if you're applying the simple method from the get-go, needs to focus on building those conditions if they're not present. So a lot of human resource professionals always say, yeah, of course the unity conditions, they're just basic leadership principles. And yes, they are. But the change challenge is that 70% of change fails despite us knowing what good leadership looks like. And so these specific leadership principles are conditions. They're not just nice to haves. They're essential conditions that you must have in place. And so your organizational infrastructure, your capability building infrastructure needs to actually be focused on that specifically. As an organization, you want to ensure that you're actually measuring your performance in that space as well. And that's quite a different way of thinking about this space. It's essentially the reason why I embarked on founding a method for change when I was working in transformational change leadership in 2018. And really seeing that there wasn't a methodology, there wasn't a framework. So the challenge with what we had was we had a lot of parts. And if you apply systems thinking, if you know anything about systems thinking, we teach the basics of that in TL 101 and through our New Zealand tour that's on at the moment, alongside those unity conditions. But essentially, systems thinking at the most basic level really looks at the parts that make up a whole and what we're inputting into that whole and what we're wanting to get out. And so essentially the people space and our people capability building space, and even things like staff retention, for example, things like our values, mission, vision, policy frameworks, what we don't do very well is look at it from a system perspective. This is what our frameworks bring, and the unity conditions are the outputs that your people system really needs to create. So every part that you're investing in, whether it's leadership training, whether it's restructure in terms of how you work with your people, how you support your people, your organizational development processes, whether it's rehashing your vision, mission, values, a culture initiative, whatever it might be, really thinking of those as parts of a bigger system that actually needs to produce outcomes. And so what our research has identified is that the outcomes that people system needs to produce is those 3 unity conditions. And so yes, absolutely, they are not rocket science. They are super simple, but essentially it's the simplicity that enables organizations to create change where it matters most. It's when we get complex with things, when we get abstract with things, that we might have some great conceptual ideas or even aspirational goals based on inspirational concepts, but we're not actually grounding that into a real work framework that's going to move the needle towards the change that you're seeking to implement. And I'm really talking about the kind of cultural space here as an organization. But what I set out in talking today within this episode is that cultural component, the people space, is your foundation. It's not that organizational leaders don't know how important it is, but it's easy to see it as something separate and not as the driving foundation, the vehicle that's going to ensure our change succeeds. And so, yeah, I get obviously really passionate about this. I've had some really interesting conversation with high-level leaders in the space in New Zealand, and there seems to be a consensus that how we arrange our people space isn't as effective as it could be and doesn't unleash the potential of all the resources that we're putting into that space. We know it's important and we're investing in it. There's more and more organizations bringing people and capabilities into executive spaces. Smaller organizations also looking at people and capability roles a lot earlier than they used to. But there isn't the structural support to understand that this particular space of your organization, this priority, is driving everything else. And so how we position our people and capability leadership, our policy, our rollouts, we really need to be thinking about that in terms of the 3 unity conditions and how we are positioning our people, our resources, in a way that we're actually producing those conditions. Because one of the challenges is that there is this overlap, and the symbol we use is a basic Venn diagram. So it's really understanding that the people system is producing outcomes into the main production system of an organization, which is where change management predominantly takes place. So that's all of our change processes, how we're implementing new changes, new systems to achieve our end goal outcome, whatever that might be. So if you think of it as a Venn diagram, your people part, which there's pretty good understanding in the change leadership space that we need to create buy-in. If you look at any change leadership advertising, being able to bring people on board and have them buy into the priorities is always a key criterion. But it's quite different when you look at it from a lens of actually that buy-in isn't going to achieve the result, because the buy-in, even though we can create buy-in at certain stages of the transformation priority, if we're not creating that ownership, which I talked about a lot in the first episode, our people, as soon as their day-to-day priorities come up, that's going to trump any buy-in they have into something that's important to you or other roles in the organization, like change management. And so essentially the goal is not buy-in, the goal is to create the unity conditions and maintain the unity conditions throughout the change process so that your change can land and succeed. So your unity conditions are the foundational part that you need to produce in your change management process. Your transformational leadership space is creating those conditions. So if this is really interesting, if it's resonating, or if it's like, oh, I get that, but it's difficult to understand conceptually, I really encourage you to take advantage of the New Zealand Leading Through Change tour that we've got running at the moment in partnership between Growth Development, who've developed the IP behind these change frameworks, and the newly founded Transformational Change Institute, which is the delivery arm of these frameworks. And so the tour is the way to bring this out into New Zealand before we take these frameworks overseas next year. And so that particular tour is being run at cost, so it's super affordable. It's coming to centres around the country. We're in Whangarei next week, then the following week in Waikato, then we're down in Christchurch. In September, we're going to be in Auckland and Wellington, and we've also got an online session happening I'm leading these sessions, and it's really an opportunity to understand this foundation, the 3 unity conditions, what they are, why they're important, and starting to understand and analyze how much of these conditions are present or missing in your organization, and a step-by-step plan to start to address that. So your change priorities, whatever they might be, will land successfully. So really encourage you. There'll be a link to check out our tour information page. Other than that, I will see you in the next episode.